When Thomas and Friends went from season 7 to season 8, there were quite a lot of changes behind the scenes and in front of camera that made a lot of fans ask the following questions. Is this a reboot? Is it a completely separate timeline? This question was posed to me by a member of my own fandom, or the Ginger Engine, and I thought I'd do a video about it. And once again, this isn't me presenting a lot of detailed thoughts, arguments, and opinions. While I do love those videos, you seem to respond better to just my general thoughts that come straight from the heart. So I'm going to do that again today. I'm going to give you the points as to why I think it is a reboot in a separate timeline. I'll give you the points against it, and then my overall thoughts at the end. Once again, these are all my own personal opinions. Your thoughts will be different than mine, and it's the one thing that makes the Thomas fandom so unique. And let me know in the comments what you think. All I ask is that you be respectful, and above all, enjoy the video. Okay, let's dive in. And we'll start with the points for the behind the scenes changes. Seasons 1 to 5, and also in a way seasons 6 to 7, still had the same core people that were working behind the scenes. We had David Mitton in the director's chair. We had Brett Allcroft, who had created Thomas and Friends. We had Mike O'Donnell and Junior Campbell as the composers. And even when it went to season 6 to season 7, after Thomas and the Magic Railroad, while there was clear changes in style and presentation, there wasn't enough jarring changes to make everybody think that it was a separate timeline. Having that fluency and having that continuation does make it feel like it is still the same shared universe that Thomas and Friends had throughout those years. That's not saying that seasons 6 and 7 didn't already brace us for the changes that were coming, the biggest of which was the writing staff. Up to season 5, you either adapted Reverend Audrey stories, Christopher Audrey stories, or they had a railway consultant like David Maidment. The introduction of the writing staff took all of that away. It was a completely new team that probably didn't have a good grasp of what Thomas and Friends was really about. If you read The Writer's Bible by Abby Grant, you can see that there is some drastic changes to character personalities, which I'll get to in a bit. But when HiT Entertainment officially took over in season 8, there was a lot of changes behind the scenes. They did stick with most of the writing staff, but did bring in new ones as they came in, who had to follow the Writer's Bible. Steve Asquith became the regular director, replacing David Mitton. Brett Allcroft had left. Mike O'Donnell and Junior Campbell had also left and were replaced by Robert Hartshorn. And even the style of filming changed as well. So there was a lot of changing of the guard, even from season 6 and 7, that led you to believe that this reboot was coming. But from season 8 onwards, that's when the full reboot came into swing and made everybody really question if this was the same universe that they existed in from seasons 1 to 7. I touched on it with the Writer's Bible, so let's just jump right into it and talk about the character personality changes. The characters of Thomas and Friends were always relatable to kids and adults. They weren't just stereotypical babyish characters or characters that had a lot of flaws for just flaws' sake. They were layered, they were mostly grounded, and you could relate to them. And there was character growth and development between seasons 1 to 7. Season 8 took all of that growth and development and completely stripped it away. All of the characters were essentially put in a reset mode. Thomas has lost all his growth from seasons 1 to 7. Gordon went back to being a pompous ass. Edward and Toby, less said about them the better. And my personal favourite of Percy became the baby avatar for the younger audience and demographic that it was directed to. The less said about the narrow gauge engines, the better. A lot of the secondary characters that had been used previously were all of a sudden gone, completely forgot about, with only certain secondary characters surviving the cull. And they were probably the ones that were already more caricatured by this point in time. Salty in particular went from being a layered character who loves the sea, but is also a hard worker, to essentially an engine pirate. Bill and Ben went from being cocky little pricks who love to play tricks in the big engines, to generic lackeys who would just transport things for the main characters. There was a push on bringing in new characters from season 9, but a lot of them were just one-dimensional characters that were purely there so they could sell them as toys. You can say what you want about the magnitude of characters from seasons 1 to 7, but they all had some defining features that weren't just how they looked. But there was a lot of things that still made people think that this was a continuation of the Thomas and Friends universe. One of which was that it was still live action. When you make the jump from seasons 12 to Hero of the Rails, you know that it is a complete reset. everything goes from being live action models with CGI faces to full CGI, a full separate timeline, and it's its own thing. There wasn't enough of a break from the established status quo to make fans think that this was a reboot, so questions would always linger. And with the handover to Steve Asquith in the director's chair, who had been a part of the classic series of Thomas and Friends, he still tried to keep it within the established universe. And he did this by world building. There was still world building of the island of Sodor that could tie into the classic series timeline. For example, in The Great Discovery, where they find Great Waterton. That's still expanding on a Sodor mythos that was still being established from seasons 1 to 7. And there was also some character continuations as well. The characters did regress. I'm not going to lie and say they didn't, but there was still parts of them that made them the characters that we knew and loved from the previous seasons. Where there was the odd jab about Edward pushing Gordon up the hill, which was a direct link into season 1, or Henry's love of the forest, which was established in season 3 and did continue all the way up until season 12. As much as people may or may not have liked the eco-warrior trait, it was still there and it was still established from classic era Thomas and Friends. Emily also had a lot of character progression as well. Yes, she is a bit of a busspot kind of character at the start of season 8, but over time, there does become more layers to her personality, and by season 12, you do see that growth. Whereas when she was introduced in season 7, as much as I did like her character in those episodes, she was a bit of a blank slate. So there was enough little breadcrumbs here and there that made you think this was still part of the established timeline, it was still a part of the established universe, and these were still the characters that you knew and loved either from your childhood or for your kids to now gravitate to. So that's some points for and some points against, but what do I think? Do I think that the HiT era of Thomas and Friends, seasons 8 to 12, is a separate timeline from the classic era, seasons 1 to 7? Honestly, I think it is. I think there is too many changes, both behind the scenes and in front of camera, to say that this isn't a reboot. The main players are the same, but their personalities have been stripped clean, and there isn't a lot of growth and maturity throughout the HiT era of Thomas and Friends. They are essentially the same at season 8 as they are at season 12. At least with seasons 1 to 7, you can see some character growth and some character changes when you watch the classic era back to back. You can see Thomas's maturity from being cocky prick to well-rounded, established character with his own responsibilities. Whereas seasons 8 to 12, he is essentially just the main character and nothing else. But with all of the staff from the classic era having departed by either the end of season 7 or a complete turnover by the end of season 12, the way that the shows were filmed, which took a lot of the charm and personality out of the series, the change in directing style, while not necessarily a bad thing, the musical scores for each character being completely reinvented by Robert Hartshorn, again, not a bad thing, but there's such a break in the difference of how they're portrayed that you do think this isn't the Thomas that we know. I didn't grow up watching the HiT era, and I can see that there is a clear demographic shift. 8 to 12, babies, toddlers, young kids. Whereas seasons 1 to 7 had more of a broader spectrum. And it's why so many people go back to the classic era in adulthood. The HiT era does get a bit more love now, and I do see good points of the HiT era, which I will get to when I start doing my own ranking videos. But for me, this was definitely a reboot, and it's definitely a separate timeline. But those are just my thoughts. What do you think? Do you think that this is a completely separate timeline? Let me know in those comments below. And until next time, keep on chugging.